They laughed at her in front of 60 Marines. A gunnery sergeant with 3 combat tours and a chest full of ribbons stood in the middle of a military dining hall and humiliated a woman he'd decided was nobody, because she looked like nobody. Worn jacket, scuffed boots, a visitor badge with a name that meant nothing to him. He grabbed her arm, physically, in front of witnesses. The room went quiet in the wrong way. The kind of quiet that means everyone saw it and nobody moved. What Gunnery Sergeant Mason Keller didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman standing in that chow hall had commanded operations that most of them would never be cleared to read about. 16 years of silence, about to end. If this kind of story hits different for you, the kind where the wrong person picks the wrong fight, hit that subscribe button and follow along to the end. Drop a like and tell me in the comments what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The bus from Harlow Junction arrived at Iron Ridge Marine Facility at 5:58 a.m., 14 minutes ahead of schedule. Claire Voss was the only passenger who got off. She stood at the edge of the parking lot for a moment and looked at the base the way you look at a place you used to know, not with nostalgia, not with warmth, but with the careful attention of someone taking inventory. The flagpole, the guard booth, the angle of the watchtower relative to the main gate, the new fence line that hadn't been there 12 years ago, running along the eastern perimeter where the old motor pool used to sit. She shifted the strap of her bag and walked toward the entrance. The guard at the booth was 19, maybe 20. He checked her visitor badge twice, looked at her face, looked back at the badge, and then waved her through with the kind of suspicious indifference that meant he'd been told to expect a civilian consultant but hadn't been told much else. She didn't offer anything additional. She signed the log, accepted the laminated visitor pass, and moved through the gate without breaking stride. Her jacket was navy blue, faded at the elbows. Her boots were Danners, well worn but well kept, the kind of worn that comes from actual use rather than neglect. She carried one bag, no phone visible, no lanyard with corporate branding, no rolling carry-on or laptop sleeve or any of the accessories that usually marked civilian contractors as people who needed things explained to them slowly. She looked, in short, like someone's aunt who had taken a wrong turn. That was not an accident. The Iron Ridge Chow Hall opened at 6 on the dot, and by 6:10 it was running at capacity. Close to 60 personnel cycling through the breakfast line at staggered intervals, the room loud with the controlled chaos of morning routines. Trays sliding on rails, the industrial clatter of serving equipment, conversations conducted at the volume required to be heard over all of it. Claire got in line behind 2 lance corporals who were having an argument about whether a particular sergeant had actually benched 315 or whether that number had expanded in the retelling. She picked up a tray. She took eggs, coffee, wheat toast. She moved with the line without drawing attention, and then she found a table in the far corner. Not the darkest corner exactly, but the one with sight lines to both exits, to the serving line, and to the door that led to the administrative corridor on the east side of the building. She sat with her back to the wall. She drank her coffee. She watched. Not obviously. Not in the way that draws attention. The way a nervous person sweeps a room, head moving, eyes darting. She watched the way certain people watch. Still, relaxed in posture, present in attention. Her gaze moved in a slow, unhurried pattern that covered the room without appearing to cover the room. Entry points. Blind spots. The position of the security camera mounted above the serving line, angled 20 degrees off-center in a way that left a gap along the left wall. The ratio of NCOs to junior enlisted. The location of the closest phone on the wall beside the fire exit. Every 4 minutes, approximately, she lifted her coffee cup. It was a habit, an old one, the kind of thing the body does when it has been trained long enough that the training becomes reflex. Across the room, Master Sergeant Daniel Cross was filling his own tray when he noticed her. He noticed the corner seat first, that specific corner, chosen for specific reasons. Then he noticed the watch on her left wrist, worn on the inside, face toward the skin. Then he noticed the way she'd positioned her bag, on the bench beside her, not under the table, with the strap looped once around her wrist at a tension that would allow immediate retrieval. He took his tray to a table with a clear view of her and sat down. He did not approach her. He simply ate his breakfast and thought about what he was looking at. Bots. Gunnery Sergeant Mason Keller came through the side door at 6:12 and immediately identified a problem. Keller was 43 years old and had spent 20 of those years making sure people understood exactly where they ranked. He had 3 combat tours, 2 letters of commendation, and a commanding presence that he maintained with significant daily effort. He was not a large man physically, average height, compact build, but he took up space in a way that had nothing to do with size. He moved through rooms like he owned them, because in his experience, he generally did. He saw the woman in the corner the moment he walked in. Visitor badge, civilian clothes, wrong table. That corner was traditionally occupied by senior NCOs, and Keller had, over time, made this an understood fact without ever writing it down anywhere. He crossed the room without stopping to pick up a tray. "You're not on my roster." He said it loudly enough that the 2 tables nearest to her went quiet. Claire looked up at him. Her expression didn't shift. Not startled, not defensive, not the reflexive apology that most civilians produced when a man with that kind of voice and that kind of posture addressed them in that kind of tone. "Good morning," she said. "I said you're not on my roster. This section is for active personnel and cleared staff. You don't belong here. I signed in at the gate. My access. I don't care what the gate logged. I'm telling you, you don't belong at that table." He put his hands on his hips and let the silence stretch, which was a technique he used. The silence was meant to be filled with the other person's discomfort. "Where's your escort?" "Civilians on base require an escort. That's regulation. My point of contact is Colonel Drayton. If there's been a communication, I don't see Colonel Drayton. I see you alone in a section you weren't assigned to." He pulled out his radio. "I'm going to need to verify your credentials personally. That means you wait outside until I can confirm with Sot." "She's fine, Keller." The voice came from 3 tables away. Master Sergeant Cross, not looking up from his eggs. Keller's jaw tightened. "You know this person, Cross? I know she signed in at the gate. I know she's got a visitor pass. I know she's drinking coffee." Cross finally looked up. "I don't know that she's done anything that requires you to stand over her like she broke something." The room had gone noticeably quieter, not silent. The serving line kept clanking, someone's chair scraped. But the conversational volume had dropped, and a number of people were no longer pretending not to watch. Keller looked back at Claire. Something in her stillness was bothering him, and he couldn't name it specifically. "What's your purpose on base?" he said. "Consultation," she said. "Administrative review." "Of what?" "That's above my pay grade to discuss in a dining facility." He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Above your pay grade." He looked around at the nearest Marines with an expression that invited them to share the joke. 1 or 2 offered obligatory smiles. "Lady, you're eating scrambled eggs in a military chow hall wearing a jacket from about 2008. What exactly is your pay grade?" A few people laughed. Not many. Enough. Claire set her coffee cup down carefully. She looked at Keller with an expression that was difficult to read because it was almost entirely without reaction. Not anger, not embarrassment, not the flushed uncertainty of someone who had just been publicly mocked and didn't know what to do with it. Just attention. Like she was cataloging him. At the serving line, an elderly woman named Dolores Marsh. She had worked in this facility's kitchen for 11 years, mostly invisible, mostly unacknowledged, was navigating a heavy steam tray toward the warming rack. The tray was full. Her hands were arthritic. The angle was wrong, and anyone watching could see the problem developing a full 3 seconds before it became a crisis. Claire was already moving when the tray tilted. She crossed 6 feet of floor in 2 steps, got both hands under the right side of the tray, and steadied it in a single controlled motion. No drama, no fumbling. The tray didn't spill. Dolores looked at her, breathing hard. "Lord, thank you, honey." "Take your time," Claire said quietly. "I've got it." She helped Dolores guide the tray the remaining distance to the warming rack, set it in place, and made sure the locking tabs were engaged before she stepped back. The whole thing took maybe 12 seconds. Keller was waiting when she turned around. "Did I say you could leave your seat?" Claire looked at him. "The tray was going to fall," she said. "That's staff responsibility. That is not your concern. You are a civilian visitor, and you do not—" "Keller." Cross again, and this time there was something different in his voice, a flatness that went beyond mild irritation. Let it go. She left her designated. She kept 11 pounds of eggs from hitting the floor. Let it go. Keller's face did something complicated. He was aware, acutely, that the dynamic in this room was not going the direction it was supposed to go. He was supposed to be establishing order. He was supposed to be demonstrating appropriate protocol enforcement. Instead, he was standing in the middle of a dining hall, having a public argument about scrambled eggs with a woman who hadn't raised her voice once. He made a decision. It was the wrong one. He stepped forward and put his hand on Claire's arm. Not violently, not with full force, but firmly. The grip of a man who is accustomed to physical authority meaning something, and said, "You are coming with me to verify your credentials. Right now. We're done with..." What happened next was fast enough that several people later described it differently. What the security camera would show, reviewed afterward, was this. Claire's left hand came up and removed Keller's hand from her arm in a motion that was technically defensive, but executed with a precision that was startling. No wasted movement, no overcorrection, just a clean removal of contact that left his arm hanging in space where her arm had been. Her body position shifted slightly, her weight redistributed, and for one moment she was standing in a stance that was not aggressive, not threatening, but was unmistakably and completely ready. And then she stepped back. One step, controlled. "Don't do that again," she said. Her voice was quiet. The dining hall was quiet. The distance between those two facts was significant. Keller stood there with his hand still half extended, and for the first time that morning his face showed something that had not been there before. He wasn't sure what it was. He'd call it anger later when he was telling the story, but it wasn't anger. The collapse happened at 6:31 a.m. Private First Class Jordan Tate was 19 years old, 3 months out of basics, and had been sitting at a table near the serving line when he stood up too fast after a meal and something went wrong in a way that was immediately, obviously serious. He wasn't choking on food. It was a vasovagal episode complicated by the fact that he'd hit his head on the edge of the table going down, and the combination produced a situation that the Marines around him did not immediately know how to handle. Someone shouted his name. Someone else knocked over a chair getting up. There was the particular kind of panic that happens when a person is on the floor and the people around them are uncertain whether to move him or hold still or start CPR or... Claire was there before anyone else had reached him. Not running, she didn't run, which was itself something people noticed later, but moving with a speed and directness that covered the distance without appearing to hurry. She was on her knees beside Tate before the second person from his table had cleared their chair. Her hands moved with an economy that was almost impersonal. She checked his airway first. She confirmed the head wound, scalp laceration, bleeding visible, not arterial. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck and counted. She checked his pupils by tilting his head toward the overhead light. Her left hand went to his sternum. "Jordan." Her voice was calm and direct. "Jordan, I need you to breathe for me. In through the nose." He was semi-conscious, eyes unfocused. "Jordan, in through the nose." He breathed. "Good." Again, slower. She kept one hand on his sternum, monitoring his respiratory rate, and looked up at the circle of people around her. "I need someone to call the medical station. Tell them vasovagal, secondary head trauma, patient is conscious. Tell them no spinal compromise suspected, but confirm before moving." She looked at the Marine nearest the wall phone. "Now." He went. She looked back at Tate. He was coming back, eyes focusing, the color returning to his face in small increments. "There you go," she said. "Don't try to sit up." "What?" His voice was confused and young. "You went down. You hit your head. You're okay, but we're going to let the medical team take a look before you move. Just breathe." "Okay." "Tell me your name." "Tate. Jordan Tate." "Good. How many fingers?" She held up 3. 3. "Good. You're doing fine." He looked up at her with the slightly stunned expression of someone who has been very frightened and is now very grateful and doesn't quite know how to process either. "Who are you?" he said. "Somebody who was close by," she said. She stayed with him until the corpsmen arrived 2 minutes later, and then she moved back and gave them space without being asked. She didn't explain herself to them. She didn't offer credentials or context. She just stepped aside and let them work. When she turned back toward her table, Keller was standing in her path. "That was not your responsibility," he said. But there was something different in his voice now, a quality that hadn't been there before, something cautious underneath the surface authority. Claire looked at him steadily. "He needed help," she said. That was all. She walked back to her corner table, sat down with her back to the wall, and picked up her coffee. Cross came to her table at 6:47. He set his own cup down and sat across from her without asking, which was itself a statement. He was somewhere in his late 40s, gray at the temples, with the particular stillness of someone who had been places and seen things, and arrived eventually at a kind of equilibrium with that fact. He didn't speak immediately. Claire waited. "You wear your watch face in," he said finally. She looked at him. "Old habit," she said. "Where from?" "Somewhere that doesn't matter anymore." He nodded slowly, like that answer had confirmed something he already suspected. He turned his cup in his hands. "You move to that kid the way people move when they don't have to think about it. When the training just runs." "I've done some first aid work." "Yeah." He didn't say it sarcastically. He said it the way you acknowledge a thing when you both know what the truth is and neither of you is ready to say it directly. "What kind of consultation brings you to Iron Ridge with a visitor badge and no escort?" "Administrative review," she said. "I told Keller." Keller tells you things in that tone. Most people get smaller. His eyes were direct. You got very still. "Getting small doesn't help anyone." "No." He leaned back slightly. "It doesn't." He was quiet for a moment. "Iron Ridge has had some problems, morale issues, a pattern of complaints that hasn't been addressed the way it should have been." He said this carefully, not like accusation, but like disclosure. People talk eventually. Things that should have been reported get reported. Sometimes someone gets sent to look at it. Claire said nothing. "I'm not asking who sent you," Cross said. "I'm not asking for your clearance. He picked up his cup. "I'm just noting that the problems here are real. Whatever you're here to review, you're seeing some of it this morning." He stood. "For what it's worth," he said, "you handled yourself well with Tate. He's a good kid. Would have been a bad morning if someone hadn't moved." He took his cup and went back to his table. Claire watched him go. Then she turned slightly and looked at the room, at Keller near the door, talking to two of his NCOs with a focused intensity that had nothing casual about it, at the kitchen staff moving behind the serving line, at the young Marines who kept glancing at her corner with expressions she recognized, curiosity edged with something they couldn't name. She looked at Dolores Marsh, who was wiping down the warming rack and who caught Claire's eye and offered a small nod, the kind of nod that contains a history of being unseen. Claire nodded back. Then she looked back at Keller. He had produced a notepad from somewhere and was writing things down while one of his NCOs talked. His jaw was set. His posture had the rigid quality of a man who has decided, specifically and deliberately, to pursue something. He wasn't letting this go. Claire had known, from the moment she walked in this morning, that she was going to see something in this facility that needed to be seen. She'd been prepared for records, for testimony, for the dry administrative evidence of a pattern of behavior documented in incident reports and personnel files. She had not expected to see it demonstrated for her, live, in the first 20 minutes. She thought about the photograph in her jacket pocket, creased along one fold, slightly worn at the corners. A group of people standing in front of something that looked like a mountain, in a country where the mountains were a particular shade of gray-green at that elevation. Everyone in the photograph was younger than they should have been. Everyone in the photograph was still there, in some version, inside her. She thought about what Cross had said. People talk, eventually. She thought about Keller's notepad. She drank the rest of her coffee, which had gone cold. And across the room, Gunnery Sergeant Mason Keller finished writing something down, tore the page from the notepad, folded it once, and handed it to his NCO with the deliberate precision of a man who believes he has just found a way to win. He looked across the room at Claire's corner table. She looked back at him. Neither of them looked away. Keller's NCO was a staff sergeant named Briggs, mid-30s, wide through the shoulders, with the particular kind of loyalty that attaches itself to whoever holds rank, and never asks too many questions about whether that rank is being used well. He took the folded note, pocketed it, and left the dining hall through the side door without looking at anyone. Claire watched him go. She didn't know what was on that note. She had a reasonable guess. She folded her napkin, set it on her tray, and sat for another 3 minutes finishing the last of her cold coffee. Around her, the dining hall was returning to its normal morning rhythm. Conversations restarting, the serving line thinning out as the early shift filtered toward their posts, the particular low-grade noise of a large institutional space settling back into itself after a disruption. People were pretending not to look at her corner table with varying degrees of success. At 6:54, she picked up her bag and walked to the return window with her tray. Dolores Marsh was there, wiping down the counter. "Thank you," Dolores said, quiet enough that it didn't carry. "For earlier, with the tray." "It was going to fall," Claire said. "People see things going wrong in here all the time." Dolores kept wiping the counter, not making eye contact. "Most of them keep eating." Claire set her tray on the rack. "How long have you been working this facility?" 11 years. "You like it?" Dolores's hand slowed on the counter. She glanced up briefly. A look that contained something complicated, something that had been compressed over a long period of time into a very small space. "Some days," she said. Claire nodded. She picked up her bag and walked toward the main exit. Behind her, she could feel Keller watching from somewhere near the door to the administrative corridor. She didn't look back. The base administrative building was a 2-story structure connected to the main complex by a covered walkway that ran along the north side of the facility. Claire had the layout from the briefing materials she'd reviewed before arriving, but there's a difference between a floor plan and a physical space, and she spent the walk paying attention to the difference, where the cameras were positioned, where the foot traffic tended to pool, which corridors had the particular echoey quality that meant they were underused. She was 10 minutes early for her 7:30 meeting with Colonel Drayton. She found his outer office on the second floor and introduced herself to the administrative specialist at the desk, a corporal named Reyes, young, efficient, visibly overworked in the way that people who work for demanding officers become overworked. Reyes checked her badge, confirmed the appointment, and told her the colonel was on a call that was running long, and would she like water or coffee? "Coffee," Claire said. "Black." She sat in the chair against the wall, not the cluster of chairs in the center of the waiting area, but the single chair against the wall with a view of both the door to Drayton's office and the entrance to the corridor. Old habit. She waited. The coffee Reyes brought her was better than the chow halls. She noted that without comment. At 7:41, the colonel's door opened. Drayton was 61 years old, lean, with the kind of face that had been weathered by decades of outdoor service into something that looked carved rather than aged. He shook her hand with a grip that was firm without performing firmness, which told her something about him. "Colonel Voss," he said. "Apologies for the delay. Come in." She followed him into the office, and he closed the door. He didn't sit immediately. He moved to the window and looked out at the parade ground below for a moment, a thing she recognized as thinking rather than theater. "I understand you had an eventful morning," he said. "Word travels fast." "Cross called me at 7:15. He turned from the window. "He wanted to make sure I knew you'd arrived and that there had been an incident." "It wasn't much of an incident." "Keller put his hands on you." "He attempted to, briefly." Drayton looked at her with an expression she couldn't read precisely, which put him in a small category of people she'd encountered over the years. "He filed a report this morning, before 7. He's claiming you were uncooperative with credential verification, and that you physically resisted when he attempted to escort you out." Claire absorbed this without visible reaction. "He filed before 7. "Yes." "That's fast." "Yes," Drayton said again. "It is." He sat down behind his desk and she sat across from him, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Through the window she could see 2 Marines crossing the parade ground below, heads down against the morning wind. "I've been commanding this facility for 14 months, Drayton said. "In that time I've received 19 formal complaints involving Sergeant Keller. Civilian staff, junior enlisted, 2 contractors. The complaints have a consistent character. He paused. They've been handled internally, which means, in practice, they haven't been handled. Who's been handling them? Keller's direct superior is Major Holt. Holt and Keller have a relationship that goes back to Camp Pendleton, roughly 8 years. He said this the way people say things they've thought about many times and arrived at a particular kind of tired conclusion about. I've raised concerns. The concerns have been noted. So you asked for an outside review. I requested an administrative audit of personnel conduct and complaint resolution procedures, which is a sentence that sounds bureaucratic enough that it doesn't raise flags. He looked at her directly. I was told someone would be sent. I was given a name. I was told not to brief anyone else in advance of the arrival. Did you follow those instructions? I did. Did Holt know I was coming? Something moved across Drayton's face. Not for me. Claire filed that. Tell me about the kitchen staff, she said. Drayton seemed mildly surprised by the pivot. What specifically? Dolores Marsh, 11 years. What's her situation? He opened a folder on his desk, and she noticed he didn't have to search for it. It was already on top, which meant he'd pulled it before she arrived, which meant Cross had said something specific when he called. She's filed 3 complaints over the past 2 years. Workplace conduct. She's been on reduced hours twice following the filings. Officially for operational reasons, the schedule adjustments were signed off by the facilities coordinator who reports to... He stopped. Who reports to Holt? Claire finished. Yes. She looked out the window. What about the medical station? Who runs it? Lieutenant Commander Patricia Fenn. She's good. Separate reporting chain from Holt. She goes through the base surgeon's office. He paused. She's also filed a complaint. Different nature. She's documented a pattern of delayed incident reporting for injuries that occur on Keller's watch. Minor injuries that should have generated paperwork didn't generate paperwork until she pushed. How many? 7 in 11 months. And the paperwork, when it came, was incomplete. Claire was quiet for a moment. 7 incidents in 11 months wasn't a number you arrived at by accident. That was a system. I'm going to need access to personnel files, incident logs, and scheduling records for the past 18 months, she said. I'll also need a workspace, something that isn't on a floor where Keller or Holt are likely to be walking past. I've arranged an office on this floor. Reyes has the key. I'll need to speak with staff directly, starting with kitchen personnel and junior enlisted from Keller's roster. I can make that happen quietly. It needs to be quiet, she said. Once people know what the review is actually about, anyone connected to Keller will start adjusting their recollections. Understood. Drayton folded his hands on the desk. There's something else. She waited. Keller's report this morning. He didn't just file it with Holt. He copied it to the Inspector General's office at the regional command level, with a note flagging what he called an unauthorized civilian gaining access to sensitive areas and behaving in a threatening manner. Drayton's voice was controlled, but she could hear the thing underneath it. Not anger exactly, more like the exhaustion of watching something predictable unfold. He moved fast, faster than someone does when they're reacting. He moved fast because he had a plan ready, Claire said. He's done this before. Filed preemptive reports? When he feels threatened, yes. It's a pattern. She looked at Drayton. How many of those 19 complaints were followed by counterfilings from him? Drayton opened the folder again and spent a moment with it. 12. 12 out of 19. She didn't say anything else about that. The number said it for her. What do you need from me right now? Drayton said. To do exactly what you've been doing, she said, which is nothing that looks like you're doing anything. The office Reyes showed her to was small and faced the interior courtyard rather than the street, which she approved of. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, a window that could be cracked for air. Someone had put a fresh legal pad on the desk. She set her bag down, opened it, and took out a thin black notebook that she'd been carrying for 3 weeks. She opened it to the page she'd started the night before at the motel off Route 9, where she'd stopped after the 6-hour drive from Quantico. She began adding to her notes. Her handwriting was small and precise and would have been largely illegible to anyone but her, which was intentional. At 9:15, she heard footsteps in the corridor outside her door. 2 sets, moving with purpose. They stopped outside. There was a pause, the kind of pause that means someone is deciding something, and then the steps moved on. She looked at the door, then she looked back at her notebook. At 9:22, her door opened without a knock. The man who came in was Major Dennis Holt. She knew him from the photograph in his file, which she had reviewed as part of the pre-arrival briefing package. 48 years old, heavy-set in the way of a man who had been fit for a long time and then stopped being fit but retained the bearing that came from the earlier version of himself. His uniform was correct and pressed. His expression was carefully neutral in a way that was itself a kind of aggression. Behind him was Staff Sergeant Briggs from the dining hall. She hadn't seen that connection explicitly in the files, but there it was. "Ms. Voss," Holt said. He didn't extend a hand. "I'm Major Holt, Facility Executive Officer. I wanted to introduce myself and clarify a few things about your access while you're on base." "Good morning, Major." She set her pen down. "Close the door, please." Holt blinked. A small disruption in the neutral expression. He looked at Briggs, then back at her, then reached back and pushed the door closed. Briggs remained inside the room. "I don't believe I've seen your formal authorization documents," Holt said. "Specifically, the tasking order from the regional command. Those are on file with Colonel Drayton. I'd like to review them personally. Then I'd suggest requesting them from Colonel Drayton. You understand that as the facility executive officer, I have an interest in knowing the scope and nature of any administrative review conducted on this base." "Absolutely," Claire said. "When the review generates findings that require your input, you'll be notified." He stared at her. "That's not how this works." "Major, you walked into my workspace without knocking. I'm going to ask you to start over." She said this evenly, without heat. "What specifically do you need?" Something moved behind his eyes. He was recalibrating. She could see it. The kind of adjustment a person makes when they expected a specific kind of resistance and are encountering a different kind instead. He'd expected either deference or confrontation. She'd given him neither. "Gunnery Sergeant Keller filed a report this morning indicating a concern about your conduct during an incident in the dining facility," he said. "I'd like to get your account of that incident." "I'm sure that report is very detailed," Claire said. "I'll review it as part of the broader assessment." "As part of—" He stopped, restarted. "You were involved in the incident. I'm asking about your conduct." "My conduct was to help a person who needed help and to decline to be physically removed from a facility where I have authorized access." She looked at him steadily. "If Sergeant Keller has specific concerns about that, he can address them through the appropriate channels." "I am the appropriate channel." "Are you?" She tilted her head slightly. "Then you'd know that a civilian consultant operating under a tasking order from the regional IG's liaison office isn't subject to informal conduct review by the facility executive officer." She picked up her pen again. "Is there something else?" The silence in the room was significant. Briggs, behind Holt, had the expression of a man who is beginning to understand that he may have stepped into something considerably larger than it looked from the outside. Holt took a breath. "I want it noted that I have concerns about the nature of this review and the process by which it was initiated." "Noted," Claire said. "Thank you, Major." He left. Briggs followed him. The door closed. She sat for a moment, pen in hand, and listened to their footsteps going down the corridor. Then she wrote 2 words in her notebook and circled them. Holt knew. She spent the rest of the morning in the records room on the first floor with a corporal named Alvarado who had been assigned to assist her and who turned out to be quietly, precisely efficient, pulling files, organizing them by date, answering questions about the filing system with the careful accuracy of someone who knows exactly where every piece of paper is because they are the person who put it there. Alvarado was 22. He'd been at Iron Ridge for 8 months. At one point, while he was retrieving a set of scheduling records from the back of the room, Claire said, "How long has Dolores Marsh been on reduced hours?" Alvarado stopped. His back was still to her. "I'm just the records clerk, ma'am." "I know," she said. "I'm asking what you know, not what you filed." A pause. He turned around with the records folder in his hands. "Since February. The official reason is operational requirements. but she was full-time for 9 years before that. He set the folder down on the table. The reduction came about 2 weeks after she filed a complaint in January. 2 weeks? Yes, ma'am. Did anyone interview her about the complaint? He looked at the folder rather than at her. I don't have a record of an interview being conducted, but you would have a record of it if one had been conducted. Yes, ma'am, I would. She wrote in her notebook, Thank you, Corporal. He went back to the filing shelves. His posture, as he walked away, had something different in it, something that hadn't been there at the beginning of the morning, a quality she recognized as the specific kind of relief that comes when a person has been carrying something and has set a small piece of it down. She kept working through the files. The pattern in them was not subtle. It had been disguised with the kind of bureaucratic layering that makes things difficult to see quickly, but not difficult to see if you're looking carefully and have time. 7 incident reports filed late, 4 of them missing witness statements that should have been attached. 3 scheduling changes following complaint filings by staff members who had no documented performance issues that would justify reassignment. A letter of commendation for Keller signed by Holt, 9 days after the most serious complaint against Keller had been filed. A complaint from a Lance Corporal named Vasquez, who had since been transferred to a different facility. She noted Vasquez's name and current station. She would need to speak with him. At 12:40, she took a break and walked to the courtyard at the center of the administrative building. She stood in the thin December sunlight and ate half a protein bar from her bag and thought about what she had. What she had was a pattern. What she didn't have yet was testimony, but people willing to put their names on the record and say what they'd seen. Files told you the shape of a thing. People told you the texture of it, the weight, the way it felt from the inside. She needed the kitchen staff. She needed the junior enlisted. She needed Vasquez. She also needed Keller to keep moving in the direction he was moving, which meant she needed him to believe he was winning. She was still thinking about this when Cross appeared at the courtyard entrance. He crossed the small square of concrete and stood beside her without introduction, which was the same approach he'd taken at breakfast and seemed to be his general method. He had a cup of coffee. He looked at the low winter sky for a moment. Holt's on the phone with someone at Regional, he said. I expected that. You made an impression this morning. In the chow hall. He drank his coffee. Some of the younger Marines have been talking about it. What are they saying? Mostly that you move differently than people move, that Keller put his hand on you and something happened that was hard to describe. He glanced at her sideways. One kid said it looked like you turned his arm off. That's an exaggeration. Maybe. He looked back at the sky. Where'd you learn to do that? Somewhere that doesn't matter anymore, she said. The same thing she'd said at breakfast. He nodded, accepting it again. Tate's okay, by the way. The corpsman cleared him. Mild concussion protocol, light duty for 72 hours. Good. He asked about you, who you were. What did you tell him? That you were a consultant. Cross turned his cup in his hands. Listen, Holt's going to make this harder for you, whatever you found in those files this morning. And I can tell from the way you looked when you came back from records that you found something. He's going to start building a case that your presence here is improper. He'll go at your authorization, your methodology, your conduct this morning. He'll use Keller's report as the foundation, and he'll build up from there. I know. Do you have what you need to withstand that? She looked at him. Do you know who I am, Master Sergeant? The question landed in the air between them. Cross was quiet for a moment. A deliberate quiet, the kind where you're measuring something. I have a suspicion, he said. Then you know I've withstood considerably more than a facility XO with a phone. He almost smiled. It was a very small almost. The kitchen staff trusts Dolores. If you can get Dolores to talk, really talk, not just the official complaint language, the others will follow. I know. She won't do it in an office, not in a building with Keller's name on a door down the hall. Where? She takes her break at 2 o'clock. East side of the building, there's a bench near the maintenance shed. She's been eating her lunch there alone for about 3 months. He let that land. Since February, when her hours were cut. Thank you, Claire said. I didn't say anything. He finished his coffee and set the empty cup on the edge of the courtyard planter. One more thing. Briggs talked to someone this morning after he left your office. A Sergeant Lim who runs security rotations on the east perimeter. I don't know what was said, but Lim changed his afternoon schedule about 20 minutes later. Claire looked at the courtyard entrance, then at the building face, then at the angle of the security camera mounted above the door. What's on the east perimeter? She said. East perimeter borders the vehicle staging area, Cross said, and the vehicle staging area is where external visitors sign in for equipment access. He paused. It's also where the fence line has a gap in camera coverage. The new fence they put in last year. Coverage gap runs about 40 feet. She stood with that for a moment. Someone wants to know if I've brought anything in, she said. Files, equipment, something they could use to characterize the review as improper. That's my read. They'd need to get to my bag. Your bag, your car, your... He stopped. Where are you staying? She told him the name of the motel off Route 9. Cross's expression did something that was not quite alarm but was adjacent to it. That's outside the perimeter. I can't do anything about what happens outside the perimeter. I know, she said. Do you have anything at the motel that they could use? She thought about what was in her room, a change of clothes, a toiletries bag, a laptop with encryption that would take resources she doubted Keller had access to, a secondary notebook that she'd written nothing in yet, and the original tasking order, paper copy, which was in a sealed envelope in the inside pocket of the jacket she'd left hanging on the back of the motel room door. I need to make a phone call, she said. Cross moved back toward the building entrance. He paused at the door. 2:00, he said. East side bench. She was already reaching for her phone. The call took 11 minutes. She stood in the courtyard, voice low, and spoke to a number she didn't need to look up. The person on the other end listened more than they talked, which was one of the things she valued about them. When she hung up, she stood for another moment in the thin, cold sunlight. She thought about the photograph in her jacket pocket. Here, in the jacket she was wearing, which she hadn't left anywhere. The jacket she'd worn specifically because it was unremarkable and because its inside pocket was deep and fitted with a zipper that was not standard factory equipment. She thought about the facility she was standing in and the pattern in the files, and Dolores Marsh eating lunch alone on a bench since February, and a Lance Corporal named Vasquez who had filed a complaint and then been transferred 400 miles away. She thought about Keller's face this morning when he'd picked up his radio to call in her credentials, and the way that face had shifted when Cross had pushed back, and the very particular quality of his anger, which wasn't the anger of a man who had been challenged and was reacting. It was the anger of a man who had systems in place and was irritated that they weren't running smoothly. That was a different thing. She went back inside. She had work to do before 2:00. Dolores Marsh was already at the bench when Claire arrived at 1:58 p.m. She had a lunch bag, a worn canvas thing, olive green, and a thermos, and she was sitting with her shoulders slightly forward in the posture of someone who has learned to occupy space with minimum footprint, to be present without being visible. The maintenance shed behind her smelled of engine oil and cold concrete. The wind off the perimeter fence carried grit and the distant sound of a generator. Claire sat on the other end of the bench without announcing herself. She looked at the fence line for a moment. You don't have to talk to me, she said. Dolores unwrapped something from wax paper. I know that. And if you do talk to me, whatever you say stays in the record. I can't promise you it doesn't get complicated. Honey, Dolores's voice was dry and tired and containing multitudes. It's already complicated, has been for 2 years. Claire turned to look at her. Dolores was looking at her sandwich. You took 12 hours off my week. 12 hours is the difference between full-time benefits and not full-time benefits. You understand what that means? Yes. My husband has a dialysis appointment every Tuesday and Thursday. The full-time benefits were what covered it. She said this flatly, the way people state facts they have repeated to themselves many times to keep from falling into the feeling underneath them. I filed the complaint in January because he screamed at me in front of the entire serving line, called me useless. In front of everyone. She folded the wax paper carefully. 2 weeks later, my hours changed. Claire didn't say anything. The other girls, Carmen, Tess, Rolando, they saw what happened to me. They didn't file. Dolores's voice didn't carry judgment in either direction. I understand that. You do what you have to do. Did anyone speak to you after you filed? Follow up? Ask you questions? A man came. 2 weeks after the complaint, he had a form. She looked at the fence line. He asked me if I wanted to revise my statement, said that sometimes these things come from misunderstandings, said that Sergeant Keller was under a lot of pressure, and maybe I had misread the situation. She was quiet for a moment. I told him I know what I heard. He left. Then my schedule changed. Do you remember the name of the man who came to see you? It was on his badge, she thought. Briggs. Claire wrote it in her notebook. They sat in the wind for a while. What happens now? Dolores said. Now I finish what I'm here to do, Claire said. It takes a little time. I need you to be patient with that. I've been patient for 11 years. I know. Claire closed her notebook. One more question. The man who collapsed this morning, Tate, you saw what happened when he went down. I saw. Tell me what you saw. Dolores was quiet for a moment. I saw her move before anyone else. I saw her on her knees next to that boy before his friends even stood up. She looked at Claire directly for the first time. I saw her talk to him like he was a person and not a situation. She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a second wrapped sandwich, which she held out. Claire looked at it. You didn't eat lunch, Dolores said. I made extra. Claire took the sandwich. They sat together on the bench in the cold, eating without talking, while the wind came off the perimeter fence and the generator ran its low, steady note somewhere behind the maintenance shed, and the afternoon light moved across the concrete in a slow, indifferent way that had nothing to do with any of them. At 2:22, Claire's phone buzzed once in her pocket. She looked at the screen. The message was 4 words from the number she'd called at noon, and it changed the calculation of everything she'd been planning for the afternoon. They went to your room. She read the message twice, pocketed the phone, and looked at the fence line for 3 seconds. I have to go, she said to Dolores. Dolores looked at her face and didn't ask questions. You know where to find me, she said. Claire was already moving. She didn't go back through the main administrative building. She went around the south side, through the covered walkway, and cut across the vehicle staging area at a pace that was fast without being a run, the specific speed of someone with a destination who doesn't want to be remembered. She passed 2 Marines who didn't give her a second look. She passed the motor pool where a mechanic was doing something loud to a vehicle's undercarriage. She went through the gate, checkpoint, signed out, retrieved her car from the visitor lot, and was on Route 9 heading toward the motel within 4 minutes of reading the message. The drive was 6 minutes. She parked in the lot and sat in the car for 30 seconds first, looking at the motel's exterior, at the other vehicles, at the angle of the room windows. Her room was on the ground floor, east side, 3rd from the end. The curtain was pulled the same way she'd left it, slightly overlapping on the left side, but the angle was wrong by about 2 inches. Small. Easy to miss. Not missed. She got out of the car and walked to the motel office first. The man at the desk was the day manager, 50s, with the specific incurious expression of someone who has worked a ground floor motel desk long enough to have decided not to notice things. She put her room key on the counter. Has anyone asked about me today? Asking for my room number, whether I was in? He looked at her key, looked at her. We don't give out guest information. I know. Has anyone asked? A pause. 2 guys, early this afternoon, said they were with the military facility up the road, said they needed to confirm a contractor was properly registered. He cleared his throat. I told them we don't give out guest information. Did they show identification? They had badges, military looking. Did you let them into my room? The pause this time was longer and told her everything before he spoke. They said it was a security matter. They had a form. She looked at him for a moment, not with anger, with the particular flat attention of someone who is rapidly revising a set of plans and needs the next several seconds to do it cleanly. Thank you, she said. She went to her room. The door lock was intact. They'd either had a master key from the manager or they were competent enough to pick it without leaving visible damage. And given that Briggs had managed this in under 3 hours, she was leaning toward the former. She stood in the doorway without going in and looked. The room had been searched by people who knew enough to try to be careful but didn't have the patience for it. The bedspread was 2 inches off center from where she'd pulled it flat that morning. The toiletries bag on the bathroom counter had been moved and replaced. She knew because she positioned it at a specific angle relative to the faucet handle, a habit so old she didn't consciously remember forming it. Her laptop case was exactly where she'd left it, which meant either they hadn't touched it or they'd been careful enough with it that she couldn't detect the movement, and she decided to assume the latter. The jacket. She crossed to the closet. Her other jacket, the heavier one, winter weight, was hanging where she'd left it. She reached into the inside pocket. The sealed envelope was there. She held it for a moment, checking the seal. Intact. She'd placed 2 fibers from the jacket lining across the seal flap before she'd left that morning. Not because she'd known this would happen, but because the preparation that had kept her alive in worse situations than this had been conducted automatically, without debate, since she was 26 years old and had learned the cost of not doing it. The fibers were undisturbed. They hadn't found the envelope. They'd found her secondary notebook on the desk, which she'd left there with nothing written in it. They'd found her spare phone charger. They'd found 2 days of clothing and a paperback novel she'd bought at the gas station on the drive down and hadn't opened. They'd found nothing that would help Keller. She sat on the edge of the bed and thought for a moment. They'd done this in the middle of the afternoon, on a working day, using what sounded like falsified military authorization with a civilian motel manager who hadn't known better. That was not a careful, considered action. That was a panicked one. Keller had spent the morning being unexpectedly outmaneuvered in his own facility, and by early afternoon he'd done something that could be characterized as breaking and entering under color of military authority. That was not small. She called Cross. He picked up on the second ring. "They went to my motel room," she said, "used military credentials with the desk manager to gain access." A silence. "You're sure?" The manager confirmed 2 men with military badges and a form. Room was searched. "Did they find anything?" "No." "How long ago?" "This afternoon. Probably while I was in the records room, between 11 and 2. She stood and walked to the window, stood to one side of it. "This isn't Keller acting alone anymore. He doesn't have the reach to pull this together that fast without someone above him moving the pieces." "Holt," Cross said, "that's my read. Keller filed the report this morning, Holt made phone calls, and by midday they decided to run a search and see if they could find something they could use to shut me down before I finished in the records room." She paused. "They're scared. Scared people do stupid things." "Yes," she said, "they do." She looked at the room, at the slightly wrong bedspread, the repositioned toiletries, all the small evidence of people who had been in a hurry and had found nothing and had left in a hurry. "I'm going back to the base. I need you to do something for me." "If I can." "Private First Class Tate. He's on light duty. Can you get him to the administrative building this afternoon?" "Not officially, just in the area." "What for?" "He saw what happened in the chow hall this morning, all of it. I need him to understand that if he's asked, he can say what he saw without consequences." "He's 19, Cross said. "He's going to be nervous about what consequences looks like from where he's standing." "I know. That's why I need him to hear it from someone he trusts before he hears it from me." A pause. "I can talk to him." "Good." She picked up her bag. "One more thing. The security camera in the dining hall this morning. The one above the serving line." "What about it?" "Who controls that footage?" "Base Security Office. Sergeant Lim." Lim, the name Cross had mentioned this morning. The man Briggs had called after leaving her office. The man who had changed his afternoon schedule. "Is that footage archived externally?" "Should be. Goes to the regional security server automatically. 48-hour delay on the archive. So Lim could alter the local copy without it affecting the archived version yet." Another silence, longer this time. "I hadn't thought about that." "Start thinking about it," she said. "I need that footage preserved before the archive window closes. If Lim adjusts or deletes the local file, I want it on record that the regional copy exists and differs. How do I do that without tipping Lim?" "You don't go through Lim. You go through the base IT warrant officer, who is Chief Warrant Officer Page. She doesn't report to Holt." "Then call Page. Now, before end of business." "Got it." She could hear him moving. "You're coming back in?" 20 minutes. Keller's still on base. He's been visible all afternoon, conspicuously visible. I know what that means. Yeah, Cross said. I figured. She hung up and stood in the motel room for one more moment. She looked at the jacket on the closet door, at the sealed envelope in her hand. She put the envelope inside the jacket she was wearing, in the same zippered inside pocket, and zipped it shut. Then she picked up her bag and left. She was back through the gate at 3:17 p.m., the same young guard as the morning. He checked her badge with the same expression, recognition without warmth, and waved her through. She walked to the administrative building, took the stairs to the second floor, and was sitting at her desk in the small office with her notebook open by 3:24. Reyes knocked at 3:31. Ma'am, Major Holt would like to schedule a formal meeting with you. He's suggesting 4:30. Claire looked up. Tell him I'm available tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Reyes absorbed this. He said it was time sensitive. Tomorrow at 8, she said. Reyes left. She went back to her notes. The afternoon's work had given her the shape of the thing, and the search of her motel room had given her the confirmation she needed that the shape was accurate. What she needed now was texture. She needed Vasquez, who was 400 miles away and could be reached by phone, but whose testimony would carry more weight if it was on record and witnessed. She needed Carmen and Tess and Rolando from the kitchen, who had watched Dolores get ground down for 2 years and had said nothing out of entirely understandable self-preservation. She needed Tate. At 4:05, there was a knock at her door. Not Reyes's knock. Slower, more deliberate. Come in, she said. Jordan Tate came in. He was in utility uniform with a light-duty designation visible on his sleeve, and he looked 19ly, which is to say he looked simultaneously older than he should have had to be and younger than he was trying to appear. He had a bandage above his left ear from the table. He stood in the doorway and didn't quite know where to put his hands. Master Sergeant Cross said you wanted to talk to me, he said. Sit down, Private Tate. He sat. He looked at the desk, and then at her, and then at the desk again. Am I in trouble? No. Because Sergeant Keller told me this morning, after the medical station, when I came back, he said I needed to write a statement about what happened. What did he say the statement should include? Tate's hands went to his knees. He said I should write down that you interfered with the corpsman, that you pushed people out of the way and gave me unauthorized medical treatment and made things worse before the corpsman arrived. The room was quiet. Did any of that happen? Claire said. No. His voice was immediate, and then he seemed to register the immediacy and pulled back slightly, like he was checking himself for safety. I mean, I was kind of out of it, but I remember you talking to me. You were calm. You didn't push anyone. The corpsman, when he got there, he asked what happened, and you told him, and then you moved back and let him work. And what did you write in your statement? He looked at his hands. I haven't written it yet. She waited. Keller came to the medical station himself, Tate said. He stood in the doorway while the corpsman was checking me out, and he said, he stopped. What did he say? He said I should think carefully about what I saw this morning, because he'd been watching me since I arrived, and I had a strong record so far, and he'd hate for one confusing incident to... Tate stopped again. His jaw was tight. He used the word complicate. He said he'd hate for one confusing incident to complicate your record. Yes, ma'am. The light in the office was going orange with the afternoon. Outside the window, the courtyard was empty. Private Tate, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. She looked at him directly. What Sergeant Keller said to you in that medical station was a threat. It was an attempt to shape your account of an event before you'd been asked for your account by anyone with appropriate authority to ask for it. That is not legal. It is not within his authority. And if he attempts anything similar again, it becomes part of a documented pattern. She paused. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I think so. I'm telling you that you are not alone in this. And I'm telling you that writing what actually happened, what you actually saw, is not only what you're required to do, it is what will protect you, not the other version. He looked at her for a long moment. He was 19 and he'd been in uniform for less than a year, and someone with 4 times his age and 20 times his rank had stood in a doorway and used the word complicate, and he'd been sitting with that since this morning. "Okay," he said. His voice was quieter than it had been. "One question," she said. "The photograph." When Keller picked it up, Tate's expression shifted. She saw recognition move across his face. "You saw that?" "I saw him pick something up from the floor. I was at a distance. Tell me what you saw." "It fell out of your jacket when he grabbed your arm. He picked it up. He looked at it and—" Tate frowned, working through the memory. "He laughed at first, and then he stopped laughing, and then he looked at you different." "Different how?" "Like—" The boy thought about it. Like he'd just remembered something he'd tried to forget. She wrote in her notebook, "Thank you, Private. That's all I need." He stood, tucked his cover under his arm, and went to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. "The way you moved this morning," he said, "to get to me. I've never seen anybody move like that." She didn't answer. He left. The knock that came at 5:48 was different from all the others. 2 sharp raps, evenly spaced. Then the door opened before she could respond. Keller. He was alone, which was either confidence or calculation, and she decided quickly it was both. He closed the door behind him and stood in the room with the posture of a man who has talked himself into something on the walk down the hall and is now committed to it. "We need to talk," he said. She set her pen down. "We're talking. Not like this." He gestured vaguely at the desk, the files, the notebook. "Not whatever this is, directly." "All right. I've been at this facility for 6 years." He said it the way people state credentials when they feel their credentials are being ignored. "I know every corner of this base, every procedure, every piece of equipment. I know these Marines. I know their families' names. I've deployed with most of them." He moved to the window and then turned back, like he'd intended to look out, and changed his mind. "And you come in here with a visitor badge and a briefcase full of whatever, and start pulling files and talking to my people and acting like—" He stopped, reassembled himself. "I have done nothing wrong." "All right," she said again. "I need you to understand that." Keller stopped. He'd started to say something and pulled it back, and the pulled back thing hung in the room. "I handle my section the way it needs to be handled. These are young Marines. They need structure. They need to understand that authority means something." "And civilians?" she said quietly. He looked at her. "Kitchen staff," she said. "Contractors. Civilian workers who have been on this base for a decade. Do they also benefit from understanding that authority means something? That's different." "Dolores Marsh," she said. Something shifted in his face. "What about her?" 11 years of service, clean record, 3 complaints filed in 2 years. Reduced hours within 2 weeks of the first complaint. She looked at him. "That's what I've been doing with the files." Those scheduling changes were operational. "Briggs went to see her after she filed," Claire said. "He asked her if she wanted to revise her statement. He used the word misunderstanding. 2 weeks later, her hours changed and she lost her benefits eligibility." She picked up her pen and tapped it once against the notepad. "Her husband is on dialysis, Sergeant." Keller's face did something that was not quite what she expected. There was a flash of something, not guilt exactly, but the brief, uncomfortable arrival of a fact that had previously been abstract. She watched it cross his face and disappear. "I don't control the scheduling," he said. "Who does?" Silence. "The facilities coordinator who reports to Major Holt," she said, "who has received 12 counterfilings from you and 19 complaint cases over the past 3 years. She looked at him steadily. "I'm going to ask you directly. The 2 men who went to my motel room this afternoon, did you send them?" The silence this time was structural. It held weight. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "They used military credentials and a form to access a civilian guest's room. The motel manager can identify them. The base gate has an egress log." She said this without heat. "I'm asking you directly, before this goes further. Did you send them?" I don't know what you're talking about." He was looking at her with an expression she'd seen before. Not the contemptuous authority of the morning, not the recalibrating uncertainty of the middle of the day, but something harder and more committed. The expression of a man who has passed through a decision point and is now on the far side of it, where the only option is to keep moving in the same direction. He reached into his jacket. He pulled out a photograph. He held it out toward her, and she recognized it immediately. The same photograph that had slipped from her jacket that morning when he'd grabbed her arm. She'd retrieved it from the floor while he was still reacting to whatever he'd seen in it, and she'd pocketed it without making a thing of it, and she had been keeping track of it since. It was in her inside pocket right now, next to the sealed envelope, and the photograph Keller was holding was not that photograph. It was a copy. He'd photographed it before she took it back. "I did some research," he said, "after this morning." She waited. "Iron Ledge," he said. The name of the operation on the back of the photograph. "I had a friend at Pendleton who talked about it once. A classified operation. Mountain terrain. The team that went in didn't all come out." He looked at the copy in his hand. The woman who led that team retired quietly. Nobody talked about why. He looked up at her. There were questions about the mission outcome, about decisions made on the ground. He paused. About whether the mission commander made a call that cost lives. The room was very quiet. "That's what's in the sealed report," he said. "Isn't it? That's why it's been sealed for 16 years. She looked at him. "I'm going to make some calls," he said. "Tonight. To people who will be very interested to know that the person conducting this review has a sealed file that might suggest she's not exactly operating from clean hands." He was watching her face for the reaction, waiting for it. That was the tell. The waiting. He wanted to see her flinch, see her calculate, see the thing he thought he'd found land the way he needed it to land. She said, "Are you finished? Excuse me? Are you finished talking?" Not a question. Her voice hadn't changed. Her posture hadn't changed. The only thing that changed was a quality of attention. The same quality Cross had noticed that morning, the same one that had made Tate say she moved differently than people move. A kind of gathering, like something that has been still for a very long time and is preparing to be otherwise. "Because if you're finished," she said, "I need you to leave my workspace. And then I need you to think very carefully about what you've just done." "What I've just done?" "You've come into a room with an active federal administrative reviewer and implied that you intend to interfere with her investigation using information you obtained by photographing her personal documents during an unauthorized physical altercation." She looked at him. "That's what you've done. In addition to sending 2 men to search a civilian motel room using falsified military authority this afternoon. You can't prove. I don't need to prove it tonight." Her voice was completely level. "I need you to leave." He stood there for another 3 seconds, and she watched him in that time with the same flat, total attention she'd been maintaining since 6 in the morning. And something in that attention, the absence of fear in it, the absence of the reaction he'd been engineering toward all day, did something to him that the confrontation in the chow hall hadn't done, that Cross's pushback hadn't done, that her calm in the face of the motel revelation hadn't done. He left. The door closed. She sat in the silence of the room for 1 full minute without moving. Then she opened her notebook, wrote 2 sentences, and underlined one of them. The second sentence said, "He doesn't know what's in the report." The first sentence said, "He's been guessing since this morning," which means he found the operation name but not the file. She put the pen down and looked at the window, at the dark courtyard beyond it, at her own reflection in the glass, the faded jacket, the visitor badge, the face that looked exactly as tired as it felt, which was very tired, and had felt that way for 16 years in varying degrees without ever quite going away. She picked up her phone. She called Drayton. He answered in 2 rings. "Keller just left my office," she said. "He has a photograph of a classified operation from 16 years ago, and he's implied he intends to use it to discredit this review. He obtained it by copying a personal document during an incident this morning." She paused. "I need you to call the regional IG's office tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." A silence on the line. Then, "How bad is it?" "The operation he found the name of, Iron Ledge. Its report has been sealed for 16 years. He doesn't know the contents. He thinks it contains something that will damage me." She stopped. "It doesn't, but by the time I could explain that to the people he calls, he'll have done enough damage to the timeline of this review that the protective effect on Holt will kick in." So we need to move faster than he can make calls. Yes. What do you need? I need the regional IG's office to formally confirm the authorization of this review in writing tonight, so that any claim by Keller or Holt that my presence here is improper is on record as having been contested and rejected before they filed it. And the sealed file? She was quiet for a moment. That's a separate matter. Drayton didn't push it. I'll make the call. One more thing. She looked at the copy of the photograph still lying on the corner of her desk where Keller had left it. The photograph he copied, the original, is in my possession. He photographed it during the physical contact this morning in the dining hall. The incident he filed the preemptive report about. Yes, which means the security camera footage from the dining hall is now relevant not only to the conduct investigation, but to the question of how he obtained that image. She paused. Cross should have spoken to Chief Warrant Officer Page this afternoon. I'll confirm, Drayton said. I'll call you when the IG confirmation is sent. She hung up. She sat with her hands flat on the desk for a moment. Then she picked up the copy of the photograph Keller had left behind and looked at it. It was grainy, taken on a phone camera, zoomed in, the edges blurred. The group of young people in front of the mountain, the gray-green elevation behind them. The date in the corner of the original, barely visible in the copy, the last 2 digits of a year from a long time ago. She turned it over. On the back of the original, in handwriting she hadn't looked at in years, were 3 lines, the date, the operation designation, and 4 initials in a row, the initials of every person in that photograph. 3 sets of initials were crossed out. Hers was not. She set the copy down. She pulled the original from her inside pocket and held both of them together for a moment, the real one and the copy, the thing and its imitation, and thought about what Keller had done with the information he'd found and how far off he'd been. He thought the sealed report was a liability. He had no idea it was the opposite. Outside the window, the courtyard lights had come on in the early dark, casting the concrete in flat orange. Somewhere on the base, a formation was wrapping up. She could hear the distant rhythmic cadence of a count, the sound bouncing off the building faces and arriving at her window attenuated and small. Her phone lit up on the desk. Drayton. She picked up. Regional IG confirmation is being drafted now, he said. Should be transmitted within the hour. A pause. There's something else. Tell me. Holt made a call at 5:15 to a Colonel Wentworth at Regional Command. Wentworth and Holt go back to officer candidate school. He said this carefully. Wentworth called the base operations officer at 6:02. The base operations officer called me at 6:17. What did he want? He wanted to know the identity and clearance level of the civilian reviewer currently on base. Drayton paused again. He specifically asked whether the reviewer had any prior military service that had not been disclosed in the authorization paperwork. The room was very quiet. Someone told Wentworth about Iron Ledge, she said. That's my read. Keller moved fast. Faster than I anticipated, Drayton said. Wentworth has enough reach that if he calls the right people tonight, he won't find what Keller told him he'd find, she said. The file is sealed, but the seal is protective, not prohibitive. Anyone with appropriate clearance who pulls that report will find a commendation, not a liability. She paused. But they'd need appropriate clearance to pull it, and Wentworth doesn't have it, and by the time he finds someone who does, the IG confirmation will already be on record, Drayton said. Yes. A silence. Then Drayton said quietly, Colonel Voss, is there anything else I should know? About Iron Ledge? She looked at the photograph, at the 3 crossed-out initials, at the mountain, gray-green at that elevation, where the air was thin and the distances between things were deceptive in ways that maps didn't capture. No, she said, there's nothing else. She said goodnight and hung up and sat in the orange-lit silence of the office for a long time after that, not writing in her notebook, not looking at files, just sitting with the particular weight of a day that had been long in ways that had nothing to do with hours. The photograph was still in her hand. She put it back in her inside pocket, next to the sealed envelope, and zipped the pocket shut. She left the office at 7:14 p.m., not because she was done. She wasn't done, but because the kind of tired she was carrying had reached the point where continuing to work was producing diminishing returns. And she'd learned over a long time and at significant cost that pushing through that particular threshold made you sloppy in ways you didn't notice until the damage was already done. She drove back to the motel on Route 9 and stood in the room for a moment after she'd turned the lights on, looking at the slightly wrong bedspread, the repositioned toiletries, all the small evidence of the afternoon's intrusion that she hadn't straightened because she'd decided to leave it as it was. A record of something, even if only she could read it. She moved the bedspread 2 inches to the right. She ate a protein bar sitting on the edge of the bed and thought about Dolores Marsh and her husband's dialysis appointments, and the canvas lunch bag, and the way Dolores had handed her a sandwich without asking whether she wanted it, which was the specific kindness of someone who has been in circumstances where that kind of directness was what kindness looked like. She thought about Tate's face when he'd said, like he'd just remembered something he'd tried to forget. She thought about Keller walking out of her office with the copy of the photograph and the wrong idea about what it contained. At 9:30, she turned off the light. At 9:31, she was not asleep, but she was horizontal, and that was enough for now. The IG confirmation arrived at 11:47 p.m. Drayton forwarded it to her phone with a single line. Wentworth has gone quiet. For now. She read the confirmation in the dark, screen light in the room, and then put the phone face down on the nightstand. For now was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Well, she was back on base at 7 a.m. The same guard at the gate, the same expression. She signed the log and went through. The morning was colder than yesterday. The sky the color of old concrete, and the flagpole at the center of the parade ground was moving in the kind of wind that had no particular direction and got into everything. She went to the chow hall first. Not because she was hungry, because she wanted to see who was there and what the room felt like 24 hours after yesterday morning, and because there is information in a room that exists only in the early hours when people haven't yet assembled the version of themselves they intend to present for the day. The room was quieter than yesterday. The serving line was the same, the industrial clatter was the same. Dolores was behind the counter, moving trays with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times. But when Claire walked in, 3 things happened in quick enough succession that they might have appeared simultaneous. Dolores looked up and gave her the same small nod as yesterday. 2 junior Marines at the nearest table stopped talking and watched her cross the room, and Gunnery Sergeant Keller, standing near the coffee station with a cup in his hand, went very still. She got in line. She took eggs, coffee, toast. She found the same corner table and sat with her back to the wall and ate breakfast and drank her coffee and let the room be what it was. Keller didn't approach her. He stood by the coffee station for 4 minutes. She tracked it without appearing to track it, and then he left through the side door, and the room exhaled in a way that was almost audible. Cross materialized at her table at 7:22 with his own tray, same as yesterday. Page confirmed, he said, sitting down. The regional archive copy of the dining hall footage is flagged and preserved. Lim can't touch it without it generating a discrepancy log. Good. Lim knows something is wrong. He came to Cross this morning looking for Briggs. He caught himself. He came to me this morning, sorry. How long have you been doing this? She said. He glanced up. Watching, she said, tracking what Keller does, keeping notes you never filed. He looked at his food for a moment. Long enough that I stopped being surprised by it and started just being tired by it. He moved his fork. 22 months. I transferred in from Camp Lejeune, and it took me about 6 weeks to understand what I was looking at, and then I spent 20 months trying to figure out who to tell and how to tell them in a way that would stick. Why didn't you go to Drayton directly? I did. 8 months ago. He listened. He said he was aware of concerns and was working through appropriate channels. He paused. 8 months later, appropriate channels hadn't done much. So he requested the review. Took him a while to decide to go outside the facility. That's not a small thing for a base commander. Admitting you can't manage your own house. He did the right thing, she said. Yeah, eventually. Cross said it without judgment, which was itself a kind of judgment. How does today go? Today I talked to Carmen, Tess, and Rolando. And I talked to Vasquez by phone. He's at Pendleton now. And at 8, I have the meeting with Holt that I pushed from yesterday. That meeting is going to be ugly. I know. He'll have Wentworth's backing by now. Or he'll think he does. Let him think it, she said. The IG confirmation was transmitted last night. Anything Wentworth does after that point is on record as interference with an active federal review. Cross looked at her. You set that up deliberately. The timing. I set it up because it was necessary, she said. Keller coming to my office last night accelerated the timeline. If he'd waited, Wentworth might have had a cleaner window. But he didn't wait. No. She drank her coffee. He's not patient when he's scared. That's been consistent. Cross was quiet for a moment. Iron ledge, he said. You don't have to tell me. No, she said. I don't. Another quiet. He ate. She ate. The room moved around them with its morning business. 3 people in that photograph, she said finally. Not explaining, not prefacing, just saying it. 3 initials crossed out. They didn't come back from the mountain. She looked at the window, at the gray morning outside it. The sealed report is a commendation. The mission succeeded. The decision I made on the ground was the right decision. It's documented as the right decision by 3 independent assessors. She looked back at her coffee. That doesn't mean I stopped thinking about whether it was. Cross said nothing. Keller found a name and built a story around it, she said. The story was wrong, but it's the story he told Wentworth. And when Wentworth finds out the story is wrong, then he has a problem, she said, because he made calls on the basis of it. She finished her coffee and picked up her tray. Major Dennis Holt arrived for the 8 o'clock meeting 11 minutes late. He came with Briggs, which she had expected, and with a JAG captain named Flores, who had been brought in at some point in the last 24 hours, which she had not specifically anticipated, but which made sense. Flores was 35, looked competent, and had the expression of someone who had been briefed on this situation by people with an agenda and was now arriving in the room and beginning to suspect the briefing had been incomplete. Drayton was also there. He'd asked to attend, and she'd said yes, because his presence in the room changed the weight distribution in a way that was useful. They all sat down around the table in the small conference room Reyes had set up on the 2nd floor. Flores had a legal pad. Briggs had nothing. Holt had a folder. Colonel Voss, Holt said, and the use of the title, the first time he'd used it directly, the first acknowledgement from him that the title existed and applied, was its own kind of information. Someone had done more research overnight. Thank you for making time. Of course, she said. I want to begin by clarifying something. He opened the folder. Captain Flores is here in an advisory capacity. I want to make sure this conversation is conducted with appropriate legal awareness on all sides. Understood, she said. I'll note that I have a copy of the regional IG confirmation transmitted last night at 23:47, formally authorizing and documenting the scope of this review. Captain Flores is welcome to review it. She slid a printed copy across the table toward Flores, who picked it up immediately. Holt watched Flores read it. Something shifted in his face. I also want to address several concerns, Holt said, recovering his line, specifically regarding the manner in which this review has been conducted. There are questions about whether proper notification protocols were followed, whether the scope of records access was within authorization, and whether certain interactions with base personnel were appropriate given the reviewer's civilian status. Which interaction specifically? Claire said. The incident in the dining facility yesterday morning. Sergeant Keller filed a report characterizing that incident, she said. I'd like to understand which elements of his account you're relying on. The report states that you were uncooperative with credential verification. I provided my badge and directed him to my point of contact, Colonel Drayton. That's the appropriate procedure. That you physically interfered when Sergeant Keller attempted to escort you? He placed his hand on my arm without consent. I removed it. The security camera footage will confirm the sequence. Holt stopped. Flores was still reading the IG confirmation, but his pen had stopped moving. The dining hall footage, Holt said carefully, is under review by base security. The regional archive copy has been flagged and preserved, Claire said. As of yesterday afternoon, Chief Warrant Officer Page can confirm. She looked at him directly. The local copy and the archived copy will be compared. If they differ, that difference will be documented. The room was quiet in a way that had texture to it. Briggs, who had said nothing since entering the room, was looking at the table with the focused attention of a man who has realized he is in a room where several things he did are about to become part of a documented record. "Major Holt," Drayton said. His voice was quiet and even and carried the specific authority of a man who has been waiting a long time to say something and has finally found the right moment for it. "I think we should talk about the complaint record." Holt looked at him. "This isn't the venue." 19 complaints in 3 years, Drayton said. 12 counterfilings. 3 scheduling changes following complaint submissions by staff members with clean performance records. 7 delayed incident reports from Keller's section in 11 months. He paused. "I'm familiar with these numbers because Colonel Voss reviewed the records yesterday, and I reviewed them with her last evening. They've been available the entire time I've been commanding this facility." He said this last sentence with a quality that contained his own accounting of something. "I should have acted on them sooner. I didn't. That's on me." The statement landed in the room with unexpected weight, partly because it was true, and partly because no one had anticipated Drayton pointing the finger at himself before pointing it anywhere else. Flores looked up from the IG document. Holt's jaw was set. "This review will produce findings," Claire said. "Those findings will include the complaint pattern, the scheduling irregularities, the delayed incident reports, the conduct in the dining facility yesterday, the search of a civilian contractor's off-base accommodation using falsified military authority, and the attempt by Sergeant Keller to contact my chain of authorization through informal channels in order to interfere with an active review." She looked at Holt. "The last item is relevant to you specifically, Major, because the contact was made through Colonel Wentworth, and the basis for that contact was information obtained by Keller through a physical incident that is on camera." Holt said, "I don't know anything about—" "You received a call from Wentworth's office at 06:02 yesterday evening," she said. "The base operations officer logged it. The topic of that call, per the operations officer's account to Colonel Drayton, was the identity and prior military service of the civilian reviewer currently on base." She paused. "You knew I was coming before I arrived, Major. You didn't know from Drayton. He followed the instructions he was given. So you knew from somewhere else." She waited. "I'd like to understand that." The silence ran for several seconds. Flores set the IG document down on the table and wrote something on his legal pad. Whatever it was, Holt tried to read it from his angle and couldn't, which visibly frustrated him. "This meeting," Flores said carefully, "may have reached the limit of what I can advise on in an informal context." He looked at Holt. "Major, I think we should—" "Who told you I was coming?" Claire said. She was looking at Holt. Holt said nothing. "It matters," she said, "because if the source of that information was within the regional command structure, it suggests the complaint pattern at this facility isn't self-contained. It suggests there's been a protective network operating at a level above what I can address in this review." She let that sit. "Which would require escalation beyond the regional IG's office." Holt's face had gone through several configurations in the last 2 minutes and had arrived at something that was less the controlled neutrality of the man who'd walked into this room and more the specific exhaustion of someone who has been holding a complicated thing up for a long time and is feeling the weight of it freshly. "It came from Wentworth," he said, not loudly, almost to himself. "He called me 3 days ago, said there was going to be a review and I should be aware." 3 days ago, Drayton said. "Yes." "Before I was notified," Drayton said. "Yes." The room absorbed that. 3 days before Drayton had been notified, the man whose conduct was under review had been warned, which meant someone in the regional command structure had a connection to Holt that ran deeper than professional acquaintance, and that connection had been used to give him a head start. A head start he'd used to brief Keller, who had developed a plan for how to handle an incoming civilian reviewer that he'd had ready before she walked through the gate. The speed of Keller's preemptive filing, the readiness of the falsified authorization for the motel search, the counterfiling pattern across 12 of 19 complaints. None of it was reactive. It was a system. It had been a system for a long time. "Captain Flores," Claire said, "I'd recommend you advise your client to stop talking now." Flores was already nodding. Holt looked at her. His face had the quality of a man standing in a room that has gotten significantly smaller since he walked into it. "You knew about Wentworth before this meeting." "I had a reasonable inference," she said. "You confirmed it." He looked at the folder in front of him, the folder he'd brought in with whatever he'd planned to use in this meeting, which had not gone the way he'd planned. He closed it. "What happens now?" he said. "Now the findings go to the regional IG," she said. "The IG determines what charges are appropriate and which command levels they implicate. That process takes time, and it's not mine to control." She looked at him steadily. "What I can tell you is that the people who filed complaints, the people who were ignored, reassigned, had their hours cut, their accounts will be part of the record, in full, with their names on them." Holt nodded slowly. Something in his posture had changed. Not contrition exactly, not the clean emotional clarity of a person who has arrived at remorse, but the more complicated and honest-looking posture of someone who has run out of options and is now in the process of understanding what that means. Briggs stood, gathered nothing because he had nothing, and left without speaking. Flores began organizing his legal pad. Drayton remained seated, which meant he had something else. "One question," Drayton said, looking at Holt. "Vasquez, Lance Corporal Vasquez, transferred to Pendleton 8 months ago. Was that transfer initiated by you?" A pause. "It was recommended by Keller. I approved it." "On what basis?" "Operational fit," Holt said. The phrase came out flat and empty, stripped of the authority it was supposed to carry. "That was the documentation." "What was the actual basis?" Holt looked at the closed folder. He filed a complaint. Drayton didn't say anything else. She spent the rest of the morning finishing her records review and conducting 3 conversations that she'd been building toward since the afternoon before. Carmen and Tess came together, 2 kitchen workers in their 40s who arrived at the small conference room at 10 o'clock with the guarded, assessing energy of people who have been let down by official processes before and are deciding in real time whether this one is different. Carmen had a small scar on her chin from a kitchen accident 4 years ago that had generated no incident report. Tess had been offered a transfer to a different mess facility 6 months ago, shortly after she'd spoken informally with the JAG representative about the conditions in the kitchen. She hadn't taken the transfer, she'd stayed. Claire let them talk at their own pace. They talked for 40 minutes. When they left, she sat for a moment with what they'd given her. Not in the legal sense, not the formal account language she'd been working with in files and formal interviews, but the texture of it, the day-to-day weight of working in a place where the person with authority over your schedule could punish you for speaking, and where the punishment was calibrated carefully enough that it was hard to name directly. Not fired, just diminished. Not attacked, just made smaller over time. Rolando came alone at 11:15. He was 53, originally from Corpus Christi, and had worked kitchen jobs for 30 years at various facilities. He sat across from her and put his hands flat on the table and said, "I know what you're going to ask me." "All right," she said, "and I want to say first that I should have filed when Dolores did. I should have. I didn't." He looked at his hands. "I have a son at Paris Island right now, in training, and I thought about how things work, how they can work, and I didn't file." "I understand that. Do you?" He looked up, not challenging, genuinely asking. "I've made decisions under pressure about what to say and what not to say," she said, "and I've had to live with both kinds." She looked at him. "What you do now matters. What you did before. I understand it. Most people would have done the same." He nodded slowly. He talked for 35 minutes. At 12:45, she called Vasquez at Pendleton. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been told to expect her call, which meant Cross had spoken to him already. "Lance Corporal Vasquez. This is Colonel Voss. I'm conducting an administrative review of Iron Ridge facility personnel conduct. I'd like to ask you some questions about your time there. You are not required to answer, and this conversation will be recorded with your permission. Do you consent?" A pause. "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me about the complaint you filed in January of last year," he told her. It took 22 minutes, and his voice was steady throughout, except for one moment near the end, when he described coming back to his bunk after filing and finding that 3 people he'd considered friends had stopped talking to him, and his voice went briefly, precisely unsteady, and then came back. "After you filed," she said, "were you contacted by anyone asking you to revise your statement?" "Staff Sergeant Briggs came to see me. Same week." "What did he say?" "He said Sergeant Keller was a good Marine and that the incident I described was probably a misunderstanding and that sometimes these things are better handled informally. He said filing formal complaints had a way of following people around." A pause. "He said it friendly." "That was the part that bothered me most. How friendly he was about it." She wrote in her notebook. 3 weeks later, I got my transfer orders," Vasquez said. "Pendleton, operational fit." "Thank you, Lance Corporal. Your account will be part of the formal record. Do you have anything else you want to add?" Another pause. Longer. "There was a PFC," he said. "Name of Garrett. He saw what happened with me and Keller, the original incident. He was going to file a supporting statement. 2 days after I filed, he told me he'd decided not to. He wouldn't say why." He paused. "I always wondered about that." She noted the name. "I'll look into it." She hung up and sat for a moment in the conference room, which was quiet in the middle of the day with the building's low hum underneath everything. She had what she needed for the findings. The shape was complete, a pattern of intimidation running through a specific section of a specific facility, enabled by a complicit executive officer, protected by a connection to the regional command level that had allowed counter-filing and informal pressure campaigns to suppress complaints over a period of years. Multiple victims. Documented retaliation, falsified incident reports, an unauthorized search of a federal reviewer's accommodation, evidence tampering attempted and prevented. She knew what the findings would say. She knew what the recommendations would be. What she also knew, and this was the part she sat with for a while, was that the findings and recommendations were the beginning of a process, not the end of one. The IG's office would take the report and begin its own process. That process would take months. Holt and Keller would have legal representation, and the legal representation would do what legal representation does. Wentworth's involvement would complicate the chain of authority in ways that might slow things down significantly. Dolores Marsh's husband had dialysis on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She picked up her phone and made one more call, not to the IG's office, not to Drayton, but to a number at the regional HR liaison office, where she happened to know a GS-13 who had the authority to flag benefit eligibility cases for expedited review pending investigation outcomes. The call took 8 minutes. When she hung up, she sat for a moment, feeling the specific kind of tiredness that was different from the previous day's tiredness, less the weight of the day's effort, and more the weight of understanding exactly how long some things take and exactly how much can go wrong in the time between a report being filed and anything changing. She stood, gathered her notebook, and went to find Cross. He was in the courtyard, same as yesterday, cup of coffee, looking at the sky. Holt confirmed Wentworth called him 3 days before Drayton was notified, she said. Cross didn't look surprised. Wentworth and Holt go back to OCS. I know. The IG will want to look at how far the network runs. She stood beside him. Keller is still on base. He's been in his section all day, conspicuously present, conspicuously correct. Cross turned his cup. He knows. He knows the meeting this morning didn't go the way he expected. He knows more than that, Cross said. Briggs came out of that meeting and went straight to Keller's section. He was in there for 12 minutes. He paused. Keller's been very quiet since. She looked at the courtyard, at the flat winter light on the concrete. How are the Marines in his section handling it? Carefully, Cross considered. The younger ones, Tate's group, they've been talking among themselves, about yesterday morning, about the way things have been. He paused. About whether they should have said something sooner. They're not responsible for the system they were working in. No, but they're going to feel like they are for a while. He looked at her. That's what this kind of thing does. It doesn't just land on the people who ran it, it spreads. She knew that. She knew it from Iron Ledge, and from the years after Iron Ledge, and from the particular kind of silence that follows an event where everyone who is present spends the rest of their life doing a specific accounting of what they did and didn't do in the moment. The findings will be filed tomorrow, she said. I'll be off base by noon. Cross looked at her. Just like that, he said. The review is done. What comes next isn't mine to run. He nodded slowly. He looked back at the sky. You know what the hardest part of this kind of thing is? She waited. Not the filing, he said. Not even the wait. He turned his cup in his hands. It's the morning after you file, when you come to work and everything looks exactly the same as it did before. The same building, the same faces. And you know something has changed, but you can't see it yet. And you don't know if you'll be around when you finally can. She looked at the courtyard. You will be, she said. It wasn't a guarantee. They both knew it wasn't a guarantee. But he nodded, and she thought it was the specific nod of someone who needs to hear a thing said clearly, even when they understand the limits of it, and she understood that, and she didn't walk it back. She went back inside. At 4:30, Reyes knocked on her door. Ma'am, there's a gunnery sergeant Keller here. He says he needs 5 minutes. She looked up from the draft findings she'd been working on for the past 2 hours. Tell him I'm unavailable, she said. Reyes absorbed this. He says it's important. Tell him to submit a written statement through the formal review intake process. She looked back at her document. Reyes, tell him gently. A pause. Yes, ma'am. The footsteps in the corridor were Reyes going to deliver the message, and then a longer pause, and then 2 sets of footsteps. Reyes returning and another set going the other direction, slower, with the specific quality of someone who has arrived at a door expecting one thing and is leaving with another. She listened until the second set of footsteps was gone. Then she turned back to the draft and kept working. She finished the draft findings at 8:47 p.m. Not the final version. That would need one more pass in the morning, a clean read with fresh eyes before she transmitted it to the regional IG's office. But the substance was complete. 41 pages covering the complaint pattern, the retaliation chronology, the scheduling irregularities, the delayed incident reports, the motel search, the attempted evidence interference, and the Wentworth connection. Each finding sourced to specific documents, specific testimony, specific dates. The kind of report that was difficult to argue with, not because it was aggressive, but because it was precise. She saved it to the encrypted drive, shut the laptop, and sat in the small office for a moment in the quiet. The building had emptied out over the last 2 hours. She could hear the HVAC system and nothing else. Through the window, the courtyard was dark except for the orange perimeter lights, and the flagpole at the center of the parade ground was visible against the sky, the flag moving in the same directionless wind as the morning. She turned off the desk lamp and left. That night, she sat on the edge of the motel bed and took the photograph out of her inside pocket. She hadn't looked at it directly in 2 days. Had been aware of it, the way you're aware of a weight you're carrying, but hadn't looked. Now she held it in the lamplight and looked at it properly. 7 people. A mountain behind them that was gray-green at that elevation, the kind of green that only exists above 4,000 meters, where the light is different and the air is thin, and every decision you make feels more consequential because your body is already working harder just to maintain itself. They were young. That was always the thing that hit her when she looked at this photograph. How young they all were. She hadn't felt young then. She'd felt experienced, seasoned, ready for anything that operation would ask of her. Now she looked at her own face in the photograph and saw someone who was younger than she'd understood herself to be. 3 sets of initials crossed out on the back. Reyes, Dombrowski, Park. She'd written those lines herself, years later, in the particular ritual of acknowledgement that has no official form and no ceremony, and is just a person alone with a piece of paper doing the only thing left available to them. The decision she'd made on that mountain, the call that was in the sealed report, the one Keller had tried to weaponize without knowing what it contained, had been the right call. She knew that. The 3 independent assessors had confirmed it. The commendation had confirmed it. She had been, by every available measure, correct. Reyes, Dombrowski, and Park were still dead. Both things were true simultaneously, and she had spent 16 years understanding that both things being true simultaneously was not a contradiction to be resolved, but a weight to be carried, and the carrying of it was simply part of what she was now. She put the photograph back in her pocket. She turned off the lamp. The morning was clearer than the previous 2. The wind had moved on overnight, and left the sky a hard, pale blue that made everything look more defined than it actually was. She drove to the base with the window cracked and the heat on, which was a compromise her body had made with the temperature without her consciously deciding anything. She was through the gate at 7:15. She went to the chow hall. Dolores was behind the counter, same as always. Carmen and Tess were working the serving line. Rolando was in the back. She could hear his voice from somewhere behind the partition, running through the morning's inventory count in the methodical way of someone who does the same thing every day and finds a specific kind of stability in the repetition. She got in line. When she reached Dolores, Dolores looked at her for a moment without speaking. "Last day?" Dolores said. "Filing this morning. Then I'm off base by noon." Dolores put eggs on her plate, then added more. "You don't have to—" "You eat too little," Dolores said, "for what you do." Claire looked at the eggs. "Thank you." "Will it work?" Dolores said, quietly, in the way of someone who has hoped before and has learned to qualify the hope before it settles in too completely. "What you put in the report." "The findings are solid," Claire said. "What happens with them takes time. The process is, it's not fast and it's not clean, but the record is there now, it can't be unfiled." Dolores looked at her with an expression that was doing several things at once, absorbing the caveats, measuring the certainty, and finding somewhere underneath both a small thing that was not quite relief, but was the first movement toward it. "My husband has an appointment today," she said. "I called the benefits office last night. Someone had flagged our case for expedited review." She paused. "That was you." "It was a phone call," Claire said. "The review takes a few weeks, but the flag means the current status holds until it's resolved." Dolores looked at her plate for a moment. Her hands were still on the serving spoon. "Thank you," she said. 2 words, simply, without performance. The kind of thank you that doesn't need anything added to it. Claire picked up her tray and went to her corner table. She ate breakfast. She didn't look at the room with the cataloging attention of the first morning. She just ate and drank her coffee and let the room be what it was. Loud and institutional and imperfect and full of people doing their jobs in the particular unglamorous way that most work gets done, which is without acknowledgement and without ceremony, and in the presence of 100 small difficulties that nobody outside the building would ever know about. Cross came at 7:40. He sat down with his tray and didn't say anything for a moment. "Keller didn't come in this morning," he said. She looked up. "Called in. Personal reasons." He moved his fork. "His section is being managed by Staff Sergeant Torres, who has been wanting to run that section correctly for about 2 years, and is currently doing so with visible relief." She noted this without comment. "Briggs is in," Cross said. "He's been very quiet, which for Briggs is unusual." "Briggs will be interviewed by the IG's investigators," she said. "His conduct at the motel and his meeting with Dolores after her complaint filing are both in the record. What he does between now and that interview is his business." "And Holt?" "Holt submitted a written statement to the IG's office last night through Flores. I don't know the contents. He's on administrative leave pending review." Cross was quiet for a moment. "Wentworth?" "That's above my level," she said. "The IG's office will determine the scope of that inquiry. It could take months." "So nothing happens fast?" "Nothing significant ever does," she said. "Not in systems. In systems, things happen slow and then all at once, and the all-at-once part looks sudden from the outside, but it isn't." He thought about that. "Is that supposed to be reassuring?" "It's supposed to be accurate," she said. He almost smiled, the same almost as before. She finished her coffee and picked up her tray. "Cross," she said. He looked up. "What you did over the past 22 months, the tracking, the documentation, the phone call to Drayton, the call to Paige about the archive footage, none of that was required of you. You did it because it was right, and you did it without knowing whether it would land anywhere." She looked at him steadily. "That matters. It's in the record." He looked at the table. His jaw moved slightly. "I should have moved faster," he said. "Yes," she said, "because it was true, and he knew it was true, and telling him otherwise wouldn't have been a kindness. And you moved when you were able to. Both things are true." She put her tray on the return rack and went upstairs to finish the report. The final version took 2 hours. She read it through twice, once for content, once for language, correcting 3 places where she'd been imprecise and one place where she'd been more pointed than the findings strictly required. The report wasn't supposed to be pointed. It was supposed to be a record. The record was enough. She transmitted it at 10:23 a.m. to the regional IG's office and copied Drayton. She received an automated confirmation 30 seconds later and a direct call from the IG's senior investigator, a Colonel Mathis, 4 minutes after that. Mathis was efficient and direct and asked 2 clarifying questions about the Wentworth timeline that she answered clearly and completely. "This will go to formal inquiry," Mathis said. "Given the scope and the regional command implication, we'll be assigning a full investigative team. Timeline is 8 to 12 weeks for preliminary findings." "Understood. You'll be available for follow-up?" "Yes." "Colonel Voss." A pause. "This is a thorough report. The work is solid." "Thank you," she said. She said it the same way Dolores had said thank you to her that morning, simply, without adding anything. She hung up and sat in the office for a moment. 41 pages, 2 days, 2 years of Cross documenting things into a silence that he didn't know would ever be broken. 11 years of Dolores showing up to a job that had been made smaller around her, increment by increment, in ways that were calibrated to be hard to name. She gathered her notebook and her encrypted drive and her bag. She took one last look at the office, the small desk, the chair against the wall with the sight lines she'd arranged on the first morning, the window facing the courtyard where the light was now full and direct. She turned off the lamp she hadn't turned on since the night before. She went to find Drayton. He was in his office. He stood when she came in, which she hadn't expected, and there was something different in his posture from the man who had looked out the window on the first morning talking about complaints that hadn't been handled. "It's filed," she said. "Mathis called me," he said, right after you." "Good." He stood behind his desk with his hands at his sides and looked at her with the expression of a man who has several things he wants to say and is sorting through them for the one that's most true. "I should have moved faster," he said. She heard the echo of Cross saying the same thing an hour ago. "You moved when you were able to," she said. "And you did the harder thing. You went outside your facility for help. That's not nothing." "It should have been nothing," he said. "It should have been something I could handle inside." "Yes," she said. "It should have been." He looked at her. "You don't let people off easy." "I let people off exactly as easy as the situation warrants," she said. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. It was tired and real and had none of the formal quality of the man she'd first met in this office. "The kitchen staff," he said. "Their situations. I want to make sure Dolores and the others aren't left in limbo while the inquiry runs." "The benefits flag will hold," she said, "and there's a section in the report specifically addressing interim protective measures for complaint filers pending investigation outcomes. The IG's office will reach out about implementation." She paused. "Make sure it gets implemented." "It will." "Drayton." She looked at him directly. "The system that allowed this to run for 3 years, it wasn't just Keller and Holt. It was also every person at every level who saw the complaint pattern and handled it internally and moved on." She said this without accusation. "You know that." "Yes," he said. "I know that. The inquiry will say it more formally. I'm saying it now because I'd rather you hear it from me first and have time to sit with it before it's in an official document." He nodded. She picked up her bag. "Colonel Voss," he said. She stopped. "The operation. Iron Ledge." He said the name carefully, like something he wasn't sure he had the right to handle. "Keller's going to try to use that, even now. He'll tell people the review was compromised, that the reviewer had something to hide, that the sealed file. Let him," she said. "People will listen. Some people will listen," she said. "And when anyone with appropriate clearance pulls that file, they'll find a commendation. And then the people who listen to Keller will have to decide what to do with the gap between what they were told and what the record shows." She looked at him. "That gap is itself information." He was quiet for a moment. "What was it like?" he said. "The mountain." She hadn't expected the question. Nobody asked that question. People asked about the operation, about the outcome, about the decision, but they didn't ask about the place, about what it was like to be in it. "Cold," she said. "Thin air. The distances were wrong. Things looked closer than they were. You'd pick a route, and the route would take twice as long as you calculated because your eyes kept lying to you about the terrain. She stopped. We were good. The team was good. And things still went wrong. I'm sorry, he said. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. She left. She was in the parking lot loading her bag into the car when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. Jordan Tate. He was in uniform, light-duty sleeve, the bandage above his ear replaced with a smaller one. He stopped a few feet away with his cover under his arm and the expression of someone who has rehearsed what they want to say and is now not sure it was the right thing to rehearse. I heard you were leaving, he said. Noon. He nodded. He looked at the car and then back at her. I wrote the statement, the real one. I filed it this morning with the review intake. Good, she said. Staff Sergeant Torres said it was the right thing to do. He paused. She also said Sergeant Keller called in today. I heard. He was quiet for a moment. Do you think he's going to be okay? He stopped. Tried again. He treated people badly. I know that. But he's been in the Marines a long time. He ran out of words. She looked at him. What are you actually asking? He thought about it. I guess I'm asking if this is what it's supposed to look like. When something gets fixed, because it doesn't feel like I thought it would. She leaned against the car. What did you think it would feel like? I don't know. Better, I guess. More complete. It doesn't feel complete, she said, because it isn't complete. What happened today is the beginning of a process, not the end of one. People don't lose their careers and face formal inquiry overnight. The kitchen workers don't get their situations fixed because I filed a report. It moves. Slowly. And you won't see most of it. She looked at him. What you'll feel for a while is the space where the thing used to be. That's normal. He absorbed this with the particular expression of someone who is filing it away for later, when they'll understand it better. The way you moved, he said. Yesterday morning. That first morning. He shook his head slightly. I keep thinking about it. Where does that come from? A long time of doing something that mattered enough to do it correctly, she said. He nodded like that made sense. Maybe it did. Thank you, he said. For what you did. For me. You just needed a minute, she said. You would have been fine. I don't think that's true. Probably not, she said, but you're going to be fine going forward. That's the part that counts. He put his cover on. He squared up slightly, the unconscious adjustment of a young person in uniform who has been taught that posture communicates respect and is trying to communicate it now. He walked back toward the building. She watched him go, son. She drove through the gate at 11:48, 12 minutes ahead of her own noon deadline, which felt right. The same young guard. He saw her coming and had the log open before she reached the booth. She signed out. Have a good one, he said. You too, she said. She pulled out onto the access road and drove toward Route 9. The sky was still that hard pale blue from the morning. The kind of sky that makes everything look like a photograph of itself, sharp-edged and slightly unreal. She drove for 20 minutes without the radio on. Then she pulled into the lot of a gas station she'd passed 3 times in the last 2 days, without stopping, and got out and filled the tank and went inside and bought a cup of coffee that was significantly worse than what she'd been drinking for 2 days, which was somehow exactly right. She stood outside with the coffee and looked at the road. She thought about what Tate had asked her. Is this what it's supposed to look like? And she thought about Dolores at the serving counter with her hands on the spoon and the thank you that needed nothing added to it. And she thought about Cross eating his breakfast and saying, I should have moved faster, with the specific tone of someone who is learning to live with a true thing. And she thought about the 3 crossed out initials and the mountain and the thin air where everything looked closer than it was. She thought about the fact that the inquiry would take 8 to 12 weeks, and that within those weeks, Keller would have legal representation and Wentworth would have legal representation, and the process would be what processes are, slow, contested, subject to the particular gravity of institutions that protect themselves even when they're trying not to. She thought about Dolores' husband on dialysis, About Vasquez at Pendleton, who had filed a complaint and been transferred and whose account was now part of a federal record that couldn't be unfiled. About Garrett, whose name Vasquez had given her, who had decided not to file a supporting statement 2 days after Vasquez did. She'd sent Garrett's name to Mathis this morning before she transmitted the report as a potential witness for the IG's investigative team. Nothing was clean, nothing was finished. The work had been done correctly and the record existed, and from here the weight of it passed to other hands. And other hands were imperfect, and the process was slow, and some portion of what should happen would happen, and some smaller portion would not. That was the truth of it. She had stopped expecting otherwise somewhere around the age of 32, and the stopping had felt like loss at the time and felt like something more useful now. Not peace exactly, but the specific clarity that comes from understanding what you can do and what you can't, and not confusing one for the other. She got back in the car. She put the photograph on the passenger seat where she could see it. She drove. 3 hours later, she was back in the city. The specific density of it, the traffic, the buildings, the compressed human noise of a place where too many people are doing too many things in too little space, and somehow that proximity produces something that solitude, for all its clarity, cannot. She found her parking spot 2 blocks from her apartment, which was itself a small miracle, and she sat in the parked car for a moment before getting out. She picked up the photograph. She looked at the 7 faces one more time, herself at whatever age that was, and the 6 others, 3 of them crossed out, and 3 of them still walking around somewhere in the world, doing whatever they did now, which she knew because she checked in periodically, not often, just enough to confirm the continued fact of them. She put the photograph in her jacket pocket. She got out of the car. She walked 2 blocks through the city noise and the cold and the particular late afternoon light of a winter day that is ending with more grace than it began, and she went up the stairs to her apartment and unlocked the door and went inside and set her bag down and stood in the quiet. The apartment was the same as she'd left it 3 days ago. The books on the shelf, the chair by the window, the single plant on the sill that was not doing well and that she kept anyway. She went to the kitchen and made coffee. Real coffee. The kind she made at home, which was different from institutional coffee in ways that were small and mattered. She sat at the kitchen table with the coffee and opened her notebook. Not to write anything specific, just to have it open, the way you leave a door open in a room where the air has been closed for too long. She thought about what it meant to come back from a place like Iron Ridge and sit in a kitchen and drink coffee. The specific ordinariness of it, which was not nothing. The ordinary was what you fought to protect when you were doing the work, and then the ordinary was what you returned to, and it looked exactly the same as it always had, which was both the point and the difficulty. She thought about Tate asking if this was what it was supposed to look like. It looked like this. It looked like a woman at a kitchen table with a cup of coffee and an open notebook, and the particular tiredness of work done carefully over insufficient time. It looked like the understanding that the report was filed and the record existed and the process was moving, and that the process was imperfect and slow and would disappoint in specific ways that couldn't be predicted yet. It looked like this, and it was enough, not because enough was everything, but because enough was what you could hold without setting it down. And holding it was the only honest way to carry anything forward. She wrote 1 line in her notebook, then she closed it. The people who never see what you carry will never understand what it costs to put it down carefully instead of letting it fall. And the ones who do understand will never need it explained.